Toledo police say a pregnant woman is dead after a shooting in South Toledo. According to the report, it happened on Norton Place near Reynolds and Airport around 5 this morning. Officers got a call about a person shot. When they got to the scene, they found the pregnant woman, Tamisha Price, suffering from at least one gunshot wound. The victim was pronounced dead at the scene.
In the quiet early hours of January 24, 2024, a shocking crime would forever change a South Toledo neighborhood and devastate a family. This is the story of Tamisha Price, a 34-year-old mother just weeks away from welcoming her first daughter into the world, and how her life was tragically cut short in an act of unspeakable betrayal. At 4:48 a.m., Toledo police officers responded to a 911 call reporting a shooting on Norton Place near Reynolds Road and Airport Highway. The caller had already pointed investigators toward a potential suspect, Paris James. When officers arrived at the modest home in the 5300 block of Norton Place, they found a scene that would haunt even veteran officers. In her bedroom lay Tamisha Price, 8 months pregnant, suffering from multiple gunshot wounds. Despite immediate efforts by emergency personnel, neither Tamisha nor her unborn baby girl, already named Malaysia Price, could be saved. She was a caring mother of 2 kids, a sweetheart. Tamisha's uncle, Terry Price, would later tell reporters, his voice breaking as he struggled to comprehend the senseless violence. "That's why all this makes no sense. I'm just trying to hold it together." Blood stained the bedroom floor where Tamisha had been gunned down in her own home, a place that should have been her sanctuary, especially during the final weeks of her pregnancy. The brutal nature of the crime shocked the community, marking the 3rd homicide in Toledo that year. The scene inside Tamisha's bedroom told a story of violence that contrasted sharply with the carefully prepared nursery just down the hall. Pink curtains hung in the window of the room meant for Malaysia, with a white crib assembled and waiting. A mobile with stars and moons dangled above where the baby would have slept. The juxtaposition of birth preparations and violent death in the same home struck responding officers deeply. "In all my years on the force, scenes like this never get easier," one veteran detective would later confide to a colleague. A mother and child, it's the kind of case that stays with you. Tamisha Price was far more than just another tragic headline. At 34, she had built a life in Toledo centered around family, community, and hope for the future. Friends described her as vibrant and determined, a woman who balanced her responsibilities as a mother of 2 sons, with her aspirations for herself and her children. Those who knew her saw how Tamisha poured herself into raising her boys right, showing up at school events and sports games while working hard to provide for them as a single mother. When she discovered she was pregnant with her 3rd child, a daughter she had already named Malaysia, those close to her noticed a renewed sense of purpose. "Can't wait to meet my princess," she had written on social media just weeks before her death, sharing ultrasound photos and nursery preparations with genuine excitement. The comment section filled with congratulations from friends and family who shared in her anticipation. At nearly 9 months pregnant, Tamisha had already prepared a pink nursery in her Norton Street home. Tiny clothes waited in drawers for a baby who would never wear them. Her due date was just around the corner when her life was violently cut short. Tamisha worked in administrative support at a local healthcare facility where colleagues had thrown her a baby shower just 2 weeks before her death. Photos from the event showed her beaming, surrounded by pink balloons and gifts for her daughter-to-be. "She was so ready to be a girl mom," recalled a colleague. "She had everything planned out, from Malaysia's first outfits to how she was going to braid her hair when she got older." Tamisha's journey to motherhood for the 3rd time hadn't been without challenges. As a single mother working full-time, she had carefully planned her maternity leave, saving vacation days and arranging coverage for her absence at work. Her supervisor described her as exceptionally organized and always thinking ahead for her family's needs. Her 2 sons, ages 12 and 8, were the center of her world. The older boy excelled in mathematics and had recently been recognized for academic achievement at his middle school. The younger son was involved in youth basketball, with Tamisha rarely missing a game despite her work schedule. Neighbors often saw her in the driveway helping the boys practice, her pregnancy bump becoming more pronounced as the months progressed. "She used to tell me that her boys were going to be gentlemen who knew how to treat women right, said a neighbor who had known Tamisha for several years. She was so excited for them to have a little sister to protect. Paris James, 27, had initially seemed supportive when Tamisha told him about the pregnancy. Their relationship had begun with promise about a year earlier, after meeting through mutual friends at a local gathering. But what Tamisha didn't know was that James was simultaneously maintaining another relationship with 25-year-old Chatua Triplet, his live-in girlfriend who believed she was in an exclusive relationship with him. Their 3-bedroom apartment in West Toledo had become the center of a complicated web of deception. As Tamisha's pregnancy progressed, James's attitude shifted from ambivalence to outright denial. "That baby ain't mine," he told a co-worker 5 months into Tamisha's pregnancy. "She's trying to trap me." The dispute intensified when Tamisha began making plans for Malaysia's future that included James's involvement, reasonable expectations about child support and shared custody that seemed to trigger panic in him. His response was to double down on his denial, telling anyone who would listen that Tamisha was lying about him being the father. Meanwhile, Triplet remained unaware of James's relationship with Tamisha until the pregnancy was well advanced. When she discovered the truth through a mutual acquaintance, rather than ending his relationship with Triplet, James convinced her that Tamisha was fabricating the paternity claim to cause problems. "He told me she was obsessed with him," Triplet later told investigators. "He said she was trying to break us up by claiming he was the father when he wasn't." Phone records would later show dozens of hostile text messages sent from Triplet's phone to Tamisha, demanding she stop lying about James being the father. This digital trail revealed how Triplet had been manipulated into becoming an aggressive defender of James's denials. James presented a different face to different people in his life. To his employers at the local manufacturing plant, he was a reliable worker who rarely missed a shift. His supervisor would later express shock at the allegations, describing James as quiet but dependable. To his friends, he portrayed himself as a victim of Tamisha's obsession, and to Triplet, he was the loyal boyfriend being harassed by a woman intent on ruining their relationship. This chameleon-like ability to compartmentalize his life allowed the deception to continue for months. James maintained his relationship with Triplet while occasionally meeting with Tamisha to discuss the pregnancy, always insisting on meeting at her house rather than in public where he might be seen. A former co-worker of James would later recall a disturbing conversation just weeks before the murder. "He asked me, hypothetically, what would happen if someone just disappeared before they could take a paternity test," the co-worker told police. "I thought he was just talking, you know. I told him to man up and just take the test. I never thought he'd do something like this." As Tamisha's due date approached in January, the triangle became increasingly volatile. James faced mounting pressure from multiple directions. Tamisha had begun the legal process of establishing paternity through the courts, which would require a DNA test after Malaysia's birth. His deception with Triplet was becoming harder to maintain, and financially, the prospect of child support loomed over him. Friends of Tamisha reported that James had begun showing up unannounced at her home on Norton Place, sometimes late at night, demanding she drop the paternity claim. One neighbor recalled hearing a heated argument just 2 weeks before the murder, with James's voice carrying across the yard as he shouted, "You're not ruining my life with this." The pressure reached a breaking point when Tamisha informed James that she had scheduled a paternity test for the week after her due date. According to her sister, Tamisha had called James with this information just days before her murder. She told him it was time to stop running from the truth, her sister later testified. She said Malaysia deserved to know her father, and the test would prove what she already knew. What Tamisha couldn't have known was how desperate James had become to avoid that truth, and what lengths he would go to ensure the test never happened. In the days leading up to the murder, Tamisha had confided in several people about her concerns regarding James's increasingly erratic behavior. Her mother recalled a conversation where Tamisha expressed worry about his unannounced visits. "She told me he seemed different, more agitated," her mother would later tell investigators. "I suggested she might need to get a restraining order, but she said she didn't want to make things worse. She kept saying he would calm down once the baby came, and the test proved he was the father. The week before her death, Tamisha had installed a new deadbolt on her front door, a small measure of protection that would prove insufficient against the determination of someone who had decided that violence was preferable to responsibility. What investigators would later piece together through cell phone records, witness statements, and security camera footage painted a picture not of a crime of passion, but of calculated murder. In the 48 hours before Tamisha's death, Paris James and Jerry Scott exchanged dozens of text messages and calls, many of them in the middle of the night when both should have been sleeping. Security footage from a hardware store 3 miles from Tamisha's home showed James and Scott purchasing items that prosecutors would later claim were used in the crime. Though the quality of the footage wasn't clear enough to identify specific purchases, the timing, just 18 hours before the murder, raised significant questions. An acquaintance of Scott would later tell police that Scott had approached him asking about ways to get into a house without breaking a window. The acquaintance, thinking Scott was having trouble with his own apartment, had casually mentioned several methods, including credit card slips and bump keys. This conversation, seemingly innocent at the time, took on a sinister meaning in light of later events. Phone location data placed both James and Scott in the vicinity of Tamisha's home in the early morning hours of January 24th. Their phones pinged off the same cell tower that served Tamisha's neighborhood between 3:30 a.m. and 5:15 a.m., encompassing the estimated time of the murder. Within hours of discovering Tamisha's body, Toledo police identified Paris James as a person of interest. When questioned, James made a significant admission to investigators, acknowledging he had been at Tamisha's home and revealing he had been disputing his potential paternity of the child. As detectives gathered evidence, they compiled a comprehensive case suggesting the murder was not a spontaneous act, but a calculated one. Police affidavits cited video footage, witness statements, and other data pointing to premeditation. The investigation soon expanded beyond James. Evidence led police to Jerry Scott, 26, who became the second suspect in the case. According to court documents, investigators determined that Scott had participated in planning and executing the scheme that resulted in Price's death. The nature of Scott's involvement suggested coordination between the suspects, further supporting the theory that the murder was premeditated. A third suspect emerged when investigators interviewed Shatua Triplett.
Of shooting and killing a pregnant woman is set to start, but now they want a delay. Prosecutors allege the pair planned and carried out the murder of Tamisha Price, who was 9 months pregnant. But now new evidence has come to light. 13 Action News reporter Alexis Means is live with this story, all new at 6.
Sasha, the newly discovered evidence indicates that there's a third person's DNA on the murder weapon. The attorneys for Paris James and Jerry Scott filed a motion saying they need to investigate the new evidence turned over to them by the prosecutor. According to these court documents filed this month, a piece of evidence in the case tested by BCI found another male's DNA on the murder weapon. It led prosecutors to investigate this person. James and Scott are accused of aggravated murder in the killing of Tamisha Price. They're accused of planning and executing the plan that resulted in the 34-year-old woman's death. Price was 9 months pregnant with James's child. Neither Price nor the baby girl she was carrying survived. The deadly shooting happened inside the woman's home last year.
According to search warrants, Triplett told investigators that James was with her all night during the time of the murder, providing him with an alibi. However, police were able to disprove this statement, leading to Triplett's arrest on charges of obstructing justice. The investigation was complicated by an initial lack of physical evidence at the scene. No weapon was recovered immediately, and while shell casings were found in Tamisha's bedroom, they didn't provide immediate leads. A breakthrough came when a homeowner 3 blocks from Tamisha's residence found a handgun while cleaning brush in his yard a week after the murder. Ballistics tests would later confirm this was the weapon used to kill Tamisha. Detective Maria Suarez, the lead investigator on the case, spent countless hours reviewing security footage from businesses along the potential escape route from Tamisha's home. This painstaking work yielded another crucial piece of evidence. A gas station security camera had captured a vehicle matching Scott's car driving away from the direction of Norton Place at 5:07 a.m. just minutes after the estimated time of the shooting. "We built this case piece by piece," Suarez would later explain at a press conference. "Every text message, every witness statement, every piece of video footage told us part of the story, and that story pointed clearly to premeditation." Based on the evidence gathered, Toledo police moved forward with arrests. James and Scott were each charged with 2 counts of aggravated murder, 1 count for Tamisha and 1 for her unborn child. Triplett was charged with obstructing justice for providing the false alibi. At their initial court appearances, James and Scott were held on $2 million bonds, while Triplett was eventually released after posting bond. The case against the suspects strengthened when a Lucas County grand jury returned indictments with expanded charges. James and Scott were each indicted on 5 counts of aggravated murder, 4 counts of murder, 1 count of aggravated burglary, 2 counts of felonious assault, and 1 count of tampering with evidence. The multiple murder charges reflected different legal theories under which prosecutors could pursue convictions. The indictment painted a damning picture of the crime. According to court documents, James and Scott had entered Tamisha's home in the early morning hours with the specific intent to kill her and prevent the birth of Malaysia. The aggravated burglary charge stemmed from their allegedly unlawful entry into her residence, while the tampering with evidence charge related to the disposal of the murder weapon. Lucas County Prosecutor Michael Sanchez made a brief statement following the indictments. "We believe the evidence will show that these defendants conspired to commit a heinous crime against a mother and her unborn child. The state of Ohio recognizes that 2 lives were taken that morning, and we will pursue justice for both Tamisha and Malaysia Price." As the case moved toward trial, a significant development emerged that would complicate prosecutors' narrative. Court documents filed months after the murder revealed that the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, BCI, had found another male's DNA on the murder weapon. This discovery prompted defense attorneys for both James and Scott to file motions for a delay in the trial to investigate this new evidence. The attorneys for Paris James and Jerry Scott filed a motion saying they need to investigate the new evidence turned over to them by the prosecutor, court records indicated. This unexpected development forced both the prosecution and defense to reassess their strategies as they worked to understand the implications of this new DNA evidence. The prosecution maintained that James and Scott were responsible for the murders, with James allegedly motivated by his dispute over paternity of Tamisha's unborn child. However, the defense saw the new DNA evidence as potentially exculpatory, suggesting someone else might have been involved in the crime. The trial, which had been scheduled to begin within months of the arrests, faced multiple postponements as both sides dealt with the new evidence and other pre-trial matters. Each delay extended the wait for justice for Tamisha's family, who attended court hearings seeking answers about her death. The discovery of unidentified DNA created significant challenges for prosecutors. James's defense attorney, Marvin Ellis, seized on this development. "This case has taken a dramatic turn. For months, the prosecution has built a narrative around my client and Mr. Scott, but this evidence suggests someone else touched the murder weapon. This raises serious questions about the entire investigation." Prosecutor Sanchez countered in court filings that the presence of another person's DNA didn't exonerate the defendants. "DNA can transfer in numerous ways, and the overwhelming body of evidence still points to the defendant's guilt," the filing stated. "The timing of their communications, their presence near the scene, the motive, and the subsequent attempts to conceal their actions all support the charges." Forensic experts were called in to analyze the DNA profile against known databases, but initially found no matches. This created another layer of mystery in a case already filled with twists and contradictions. The tragic murder of Tamisha Price and her unborn daughter Malaysia highlights several critical warning signs that can indicate potentially dangerous relationships. Experts point to Paris James's denial of paternity and his apparent resentment of the upcoming birth as red flags that escalated to violence. Research shows that pregnancy can be a particularly vulnerable time, with homicide being a leading cause of death for pregnant women. The importance of strong support systems cannot be overstated. Tamisha had family members who cared deeply for her, but the isolation that often accompanies domestic violence situations can make it difficult for victims to reach out. Legal protections for pregnant women vary by state, but many jurisdictions have enhanced penalties for crimes against pregnant victims. Some states have implemented specialized court procedures for paternity cases involving allegations of threats or violence. Communities can respond more effectively to domestic violence risks by supporting comprehensive training for healthcare providers who are uniquely positioned to screen for abuse during prenatal appointments. Law enforcement agencies increasingly implement specialized protocols for responding to disputes involving pregnancy, recognizing the heightened risks in these situations. Dr. Elaine Cassidy, a specialist in maternal health and safety, notes that Tamisha's case exemplifies how pregnancy can transform a difficult relationship into a deadly one. When pregnancy occurs in an already unstable relationship, the added pressure can sometimes escalate controlling behaviors into violence, she explains. What we see in cases like Tamisha's is a lethal combination of denial, resentment, and perceived loss of control. Domestic violence advocates point out that Tamisha's case illustrates the need for better integration between healthcare, legal, and social services systems. When a pregnant woman expresses concerns about her safety, those need to be taken with the utmost seriousness, says Monica Washington, director of a local women's shelter. Tamisha's case reminds us that threats during pregnancy should never be dismissed as just hormones or relationship drama. They can be life or death warnings. The murders of Tamisha Price and her unborn daughter, Malaysia, represent a profound failure of our systems to protect vulnerable individuals. 2 lives full of potential were extinguished in an act of calculated violence that stemmed from the most basic abdication of responsibility. As Tamisha's family continues to navigate their grief, they remain focused on caring for her sons and preserving her memory. She was more than a victim, her mother told reporters. She was a daughter, a mother, a friend who loved deeply and was loved in return. The justice system continues its methodical work toward accountability, with Paris James' trial approaching in January 2025. Yet, regardless of the verdict, no court proceeding can restore what was lost that January morning in Toledo. The unidentified DNA on the murder weapon remains a troubling loose end in this case. Does it point to another accomplice who has thus far escaped justice? Or is there a more mundane explanation for its presence? These questions may eventually be answered as the investigation continues. In the wake of the tragedy, Tamisha's family has established a foundation in her and Malaysia's names, focused on supporting pregnant women in crisis situations. The foundation provides emergency housing, legal advocacy, and counseling for women facing threats during pregnancy. "We couldn't save Tamisha and Malaysia," her sister explained at the foundation's launch, "but maybe their story can save someone else. If just one woman recognizes the warning signs and gets help because of what happened to my sister, then something meaningful will have come from our loss." The foundation has already assisted dozens of women in the Toledo area, coordinating with local healthcare providers to identify pregnant women potentially at risk. They've created a discreet card that can be provided during prenatal appointments, listing resources and safety planning tips. Tamisha's sons, now living with their grandmother, have received an outpouring of community support. A local education fund was established to ensure their future schooling, and counseling services have been arranged to help them process their devastating loss. "Those boys are Tamisha's living legacy," her mother says. "Every day I see her in their smiles, in their determination. We talk about her constantly. I want them to remember her strength, not just how she died." In a quiet bedroom in Toledo, pink baby clothes still hang in a closet, waiting for a little girl who never got to wear them. 2 brothers now grow up without their mother, and a family is left with questions that may never be fully answered. The story of Tamisha Price reminds us that behind every crime statistic is a human being with hopes, dreams, and people who loved them. For Tamisha, the dream was simple: to welcome her daughter into the world and raise her with love. That dream was stolen in an act of violence that continues to echo through the lives of all who knew her. As this case proceeds through the justice system, we can only hope that truth and accountability will eventually provide some measure of peace to those left behind. and perhaps prevent similar tragedies in the future by raising awareness about the dangers that can emerge when responsibility is abandoned in favor of violence. The unfinished nursery in Tamisha's home stands as a poignant reminder of what was lost. Malaysia's crib, the carefully chosen decorations, the tiny clothes, all silent witnesses to a future that will never unfold. Yet in their silence, they speak volumes about a mother's love and the hopes she had for her daughter. Detective Suarez, who continues to work on aspects of the case, reflects on its impact. In law enforcement, we see a lot of tragedy, but cases like Tamisha's stay with you. You carry them home. You think about them when you're with your own family, and you hope that somehow the work you do brings some measure of justice to those who can no longer speak for themselves. As the trial date approaches, the community of South Toledo continues to grapple with the violence that shattered their sense of security. Yellow ribbons, Tamisha's favorite color, can still be seen tied around trees on Norton Place, faded now but still present, much like the memory of the woman and child whose lives were cut tragically short. The story of Tamisha Price is not just a true crime narrative. It's a call to awareness, a reminder of the vulnerability of pregnant women and the devastating consequences when violence replaces responsibility. It's a story that demands to be told, not for sensationalism, but for the hope that in telling it, other Tamishas might be saved.